Morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're calling from, joining us. I want to say thank you to everyone today that took the time out of their schedule for us to have this panel and webinar and just bring more light to the GAPPRI and the true collaborative efforts that have been done in order to bring this to the forefront. I want to say thank you to my panel members that will be with me today and those that have all made this possible. I think we can go to the next slide. So the GAPPRI, the Global Action Plan for the Prevention of Runway Incursions. On the lower right-hand corner of the screen is a QR code that you can scan, and it will actually take you to the document that you see on the screen. Today's presentation, we're going to cover the background of the GAPPRI, the overview of recommendations applicable to air navigation service providers, making use of the GAPPRI, next steps, and as Shimei just said, if you do have questions, please ask those as they come available. You do not need to wait till the end, although we will have a question and answer section at the end. I just want to say this is a very collaborative effort. The people that are on the call are from all throughout the world today, and I think that's very important. One of the big things that we wanted to do were have tangibles and takeaways. So you will see QR codes throughout the webinar that you can scan to get different products and information that's available. Next slide, please. So my name is John Winnis. I am the Safety Program Manager here at CANSO. I will be joined by the rest of the panel members, and I will let them introduce themselves as they come online. So Mr. James Lewis.
Hi everyone. So as John said, I'm James Lewis. I'm a senior aviation consultant with Think Research based in our Qatar office, and I've been supporting the GAPPRI development with leading the ANSP section on behalf of CANSO over the last sort of year and a half now.
Thank you. Anthony Ackfield.
Good morning, everyone. Anthony Ackfield. I say good morning because I'm in Australia. I'm the Director of Aerodrome Operations Coordination for Air Services Australia.
Hello, everyone. My name is Tsvetomir Vlazhev. Nice to be with you here today. I'm Director Europe and Global Operational Safety for the Flight Safety Foundation.
Great. Thanks all of you for joining us again. As I said, we have a truly global panel, and the GAPPRI is a global function that we all need to bring to the forefront. And so I just want to say thanks to all of you for taking the time to join us. And we're going to get started. So they're going to stay on, and we're going to kind of set the tone for the GAPPRI webinar. We're going to review an event, and we will go over it. I will give an overview, and then we'll have a brief discussion about the event with a runway incursion that's been looked at. So can we go to the next slide, please? And the next slide, oh, there we go, perfect. So this runway incursion example incident took place at New York's JFK Airport. On January the 13th, 2023, a Boeing 777 failed to comply with taxi clearance and crossed an active runway in front of a Boeing 737, which was taking off as cleared. An automated alert prompted ATC to cancel the Boeing 737 takeoff clearance. On the pictures, you can see the dotted line represents the clearance given by ATC, and the solid line represents the taxi route. The Boeing 777 had a very experienced captain with over 20,000 hours that was based at JFK for 10 years. The first officer had over 11,000 hours. In addition, they had a relief first officer on board. The Boeing 777 anticipated a runway 31 left departure, and they pre-briefed the route. However, whenever the ACARS message came out, they were actually given a clearance to runway 4 left, and the taxi route was rebriefed. The captain even advised both the first officers as they approached that they would be told to cross runway 31 left. The initial clearance was given by ground control just as anticipated to runway 4 left via a left turn onto taxiway Bravo and hold short on taxiway Kilo. 7 minutes later, as they were approaching taxiway November, the same controller instructed the flight to cross runway 31 left at taxiway Kilo, and both clearances were read back correctly. So I'm not sure if you can see taxiway Kilo along the water at the bottom, but there is a dotted line that runs along that path. That is where they were supposed to make the right turn and cross runway 31 left. Those were the instructions that were given. The captain was discussing performance values with the first officer, and the controller noticed the aircraft swing to the left to make a wide turn, assuming they were doing it to make the typical wide turn because of the taxi instructions were read back correctly. So the controller, given them the instructions to cross 31 left, the controller sees the aircraft make the wide turn, and they assume that they're going to swing back to the right. However, that's not what actually happened. The pilot continued past the runway 4 left holding point and on to runway 4 left. The captain said, "Cleared to cross," talking internally to the first officers, and the captain called "cleared left," and the first officer called "cleared right." The Boeing 737, which was lined up on runway 4, started takeoff roll 10 seconds before the Boeing 777 began to cross runway 4 left. The RWSLs illuminated as the Boeing 737 was accelerating. The captain stated he saw the red lights and was unsure why, so they added power to expedite. The first officer saw red lights after they crossed a holding point. The relief officer was heads down and looked up to see what appeared to be an aircraft taxiing on the runway. ASDI alerted the runway was occupied, and the controller canceled the takeoff clearance of the Boeing 737, and absence of a response, repeated cancellation 4 seconds later. The Boeing 737 reached 105 knots and just over 700 meters until reaching a point where the 777 was obstructing the runway. The 777 cleared the runway, and the Boeing 737 decelerating through a ground speed of 49 knots with just over 300 meters to go before reaching the previously obstructed intersection. The ground controller did not know if the Boeing 777 was monitoring the frequency, and when they saw the runway 4 left crossing, they decided it was better to let it continue crossing because the broadcast of the 777 may have caused the crew to stop or slow down. Even though everyone was briefed and the readbacks were correct, there was still a situation where this incident happened. Is there something else that could have been done on the part of the ATCOs to prevent this collision? So, Svetomir, I will ask you that question. Is there something else that could have been done to prevent this collision?
Thank you very much, John. It's a very sharp question, this one, and this by the way is one of the incidents that we have been reviewing when we were working on GAPPRI, together with many other incidents. This is very well investigated, and NTSB published an excellent report. Actually, they were presenting to our GAPPRI working arrangements the investigation, and I think they identify very good recommendations there. But in GAPPRI, and looking from opportunity to prevent similar events, not exactly only this event, we took another approach. This approach is based on Flight Safety Foundation learning from all operations, where we look not only what failed, we look for best practices, and we look also for improvement opportunities, things that could have worked, that they were not at all there, but that they could have worked. And it's an extensive methodology and a way of thinking, learning from all operations. I invite everyone interested to go to Flight Safety Foundation website and see it. But in short here for this event, what are these learning opportunities, if you wish, that we can take and then turn them into improvement opportunities? There are many. One is the change of the departure runway. And we know that this is sometimes unavoidable. Nevertheless, if you go to GAPPRI, you will see some recommendations there, both for ATC and for flight crew, how to deal with this workload-inducing factor of changing the departure runway. And workload management in general is something very important for taxiing out the aircraft. We have identified that it's different from crossing active runway. When you are taxiing out, workload is an issue, and when you are crossing an active runway, when you are taxiing in, it's more about vigilance after a long flight. So for flight crew, workload management is a big issue. Part of that is verbalizing the runway to be crossed. So if you need to cross the runway, and there are recommendations there in GAPPRI, if you need to cross the runway, GAPPRI recommends a process, a procedure to verbalize and flight crew interaction to confirm which runway exactly. This part of the workload management. But let's look for other action opportunities. You said the aircraft was supposed to turn right on Kilo and then turn left and took Bravo. And if you look from the point of view of finger pointing, you can say, well, this was deviation from ATC clearance. ATC could have identified it, but of course there is a very short time there available. And GAPPRI takes another approach. The approach is a multiple layer of defenses and opportunities for prevention. So, and James will know this very well because he was leading there. We have content in GAPPRI about SMGCS, about more advanced technology for ground systems, surveillance systems. So alerts not only when there are conflicts, but alerts, more advanced alerts, for example, when an aircraft deviates from the clearance. So already there, if you have that alert, already there, you could have had an alert that the aircraft is deviating from the cleared route. You know, that gives you a few seconds in advance. You know, that's very important. I'm not going too much because this is really very interesting event, but only when we speak about seconds to mention the last one is multiple layers of defense. You know, we believe there is no silver bullet, but if there is something closer to a silver bullet that we strongly advocate with GAPPRI, that's the recommendation for manufacturers, aircraft manufacturers, to develop an onboard system for traffic awareness and alerting in case of runway conflicts. And we know that here we have runway status, runway entry lights. We don't have here on runway 4 left for the departing aircraft. There are no runway status lights, but nevertheless, this is a ground system, and thanks to ATC, the collision was prevented. I believe it was 5-6 seconds after the alert, ATC was able to cancel the takeoff clearance, and the 777 succeeded to stop some 300 meters before the conflict there, the intersection, which is really close. And we've seen that in many events. And here we had sufficient time and very good reaction for ATC, but sometimes it takes longer. And what we discovered, if I can put it, we were in a search of 7 seconds sometimes. That sometimes the loop is not sufficient for alert, ATC reaction, flight crew reaction. Sometimes this is so close, the aircraft are moving so fast that you need another 7 to 10 seconds. And an onboard system, some manufacturers are already developing some kind of technology like that. Onboard system like TCAS on the ground could really help us cut these 7 seconds out of the loop and help with such kind of very critical events. And again, thanks to ATC in this case, that the disaster was averted.
Mm-hmm. Senator, thank you. That's very informative. I just want to check with James or Anthony if there's anything that either of you wanted to add to this particular incident before we get into the webinar.
Yeah, thanks, John. Well said, Svetomir. I mean, I think, as you say, on the surface of it, you think, why didn't the controller notice the deviation from the clearance and pick it up? But as you say, it's a relatively short, before they cross the runway, relatively short amount of time for them to do that. The other thing you mentioned, John, around the swing out wide left, that the controller assumed was to enable them to turn right. Which actually, in reality, was just them turning left. You think, why didn't the controller, why didn't that sort of cause the controller to monitor the situation more closely? But again, that's probably a situation that the controller's seen hundreds of times, right? Where in the past that has been the aircraft swinging out wide so that they can turn right. So potentially there was also maybe a subconscious level of confidence, having seen that before, and with a local operator as well, that the controller would have knows the airfield very well. So absolutely incumbent upon air traffic controllers, as we all know, to be monitoring compliance with the instructions given. But in reality, a lot of factors go into it to make this one a difficult one to pick up before the aircraft crosses the runway.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Anthony. I appreciate that insight, and I agree with you. And for everyone that's on the call, the QR code in the upper right-hand corner will take you to Skybrary, I believe, or Flight Safety Foundation, where there is a synopsis of this particular event. Has more details on it. James, is there anything that you wanted to add?
I suppose the only thing, and we'll sort of touch on it a bit later, would be around the runway status lights, where I think it was highlighted in the report that the pilots did see red lights come on, but actually they didn't interpret what that meant to them. I think that is part of the thing of, it's only so good of implementing all of these things, but you need to make sure the training and the procedures that people are applying are consistent and they know how to react. So yeah.
Exactly. Thank you. No, thank you all for the discussion. Hopefully that sets the tone or gives everyone an idea of a little bit more details from the GAPPRI and some of the things that Svetomir had mentioned it, like the 7 seconds, and those are the things that we're trying to do. Even when everything is in place and readbacks are correct, incidents still happen. So the GAPPRI is not completely bulletproof, but it is there, a multifaceted approach for operators, regulators, air traffic controllers, and the rest of the people that are at the airfield operating. So we can go to the next slide. So this runway incursion example incident. So the probable cause, we've discussed this briefly, of the conflict was determined by the American Airlines flight crew's surface navigation error due to distractions caused by their performance of concurrent operational tasks, which included taxi. The 3 contributory factors were also identified: the air traffic control tower's team's non-detection of the 777 crew's deviation from the taxi instructions, the timing of the runway status light system, which activated too late to prevent the 777 crew from crossing the runway hold short line, and the American Airlines lack of adequate risk controls to prevent concurrent flight crews tasks from leading to distractions. So we will go to the next slide. James,
Yep.
Thank you. And you'll take over from here.
Thank you very much, John. So I think we can. So my job now is to give you a little bit of background to where we've got to with GAPPRI and how it came about. So next slide, please. So the GAPPRI initiative was started on the back of the European Action Plan for Prevention of Runway Incursions, which first was released back in 2003. It was further updated twice. And then in 2022, the Flight Safety Foundation and Eurocontrol decided it was time to update it once more and to do a similar exercise to that they had done for the plan for the prevention of runway excursions, and take it from a European action plan and make it global. So they pulled together 200 aviation professionals across 80 different organizations to generate this multifaceted group of stakeholders and subject matter experts. And we worked for over a year collaborating, comparing best practices, and the end result was 127 recommendations across 6 groups. And these are the aerodrome operators, R&D, states and regulators, aircraft manufacturers, aircraft operators, while we're all here for ANSPs. And for ANSPs, there were 33 recommendations in the end. Next slide, please. So a little bit on the timeline. So GAPPRI first kicked off March 2023. And the first task was to come up with a set of synchronized consensus-based recommendations that would be built on best practices and provide interventions that would go beyond simply regulatory compliance. And this was to address both the risk and resilience, and also provide a roadmap for different time horizons. And this first initial volume was published in December of 2023. Following on from that was then to take each of the recommendations and start to develop the guidance and explanatory materials. And this would enable each of the organizations to get more information and practical information on how to go about implementing the best practices, and then also to provide some additional resources and additional information. And this was then published this year in August. Next slide, please. So the process we took was to first initially look at the original EAPRI report, review the existing regional and local recommendations that have come out in the years between its release, and the end result of this was 179 draft recommendations. This was supplemented by some data analysis and review, like the example that we've just seen, and the end result then was a reduction of 127 recommendations. Next slide, please. As I said, the inputs here were EAPRI, other organizations such as the FAA, partners like ACI and IATA, and then the airlines, airport operators, ANSPs, and then also the Flight Safety Foundation's learning from all operations principles. And then we used 4 main data sets, so 2 of them being global, and then 2 regional ones from the FAA Eurocontrol. And then each of the organizations and members that were taking part also brought their own data from internally, and that then supplemented the whole process. Next slide, please. So the end result for ANSPs was, as we said, 33 recommendations, and these were grouped into 6 categories. We don't have time, unfortunately, to go through every single one. So the 6 categories, though, are safety management and support for the runway safety teams, a few onto safe runway operations communications, 1 for aeronautical information, another set on supporting pilot workload and reducing the pressures, and then the next 2 sections are for enhanced procedures and enhanced technology for runway safety operations. Next slide, please. As you said, once all of the recommendations were agreed, and we came to a consensus across the bodies, and this, when we did do those recommendations, we ensured that it wasn't just the ANSPs deciding on recommendations. We went and talked to the aerodrome operators, the airlines, and got everybody's buy-in, that we all agreed and we were all talking about the same thing. And so the next step then was to break down the guidance and explanatory materials. So these you'll see in the document are laid out in 4 sections. So initially it sets out what the recommendation is, why you should follow this recommendation, why it's important. Then there's a bit on how and what can be done to implement the recommendation. And this is where we've pulled from different organizations' best practices. And this is where, for example, in the technology one, you'll see ASM GCS that we talked about, runway status lights. And then the last bit is to provide some reference materials. So if you do want to find some more information about certain things or where the information's come from, those are included as well. Next slide, please. I think I'll hand over now to Svetomir to start to go through a couple of the ANSP recommendations.
Thank you, James. Thank you, very nice overview. I would like to talk about one recommendation, but this highlights the principle that we mentioned already twice. That's the learning from all operation principle, and then the idea of multi-layer protection. Each and every recommendation that appears in GAPPRI has been devised as an opportunity to prevent certain events. It is not just there entered by the desire of someone. So how this was done? This was done by looking at really hundreds of incidents and typifying the types of scenarios that we can see. So we identified 10 typical scenarios. Each of them, they had sub-scenarios. And then looking at the multi-layer protection, we started asking ourselves, what can break these scenarios? Not only at one point, but maybe again, multiple layers of protection. So it was very, very important to talk about, when we have a candidate recommendation, what type of function it serves, which safety function it enhances, and what type of scenarios it breaks. So that's the entry point of the discussion for each and every recommendation. And next slide, please. I'm going to talk about one of the recommendations that is related to a previous recommendation in the European plan called 111, that basically asks all the traffic on the runway to be on one frequency, managed by one air traffic controller, and in one language, English. And there are a lot of difficulties in implementing this recommendation. So when we were working on it for GAPPRI, we used what I just told you. It's like, why do we need this recommendation? First of all, is what it helps us with, which scenarios, what type of barrier it enhances, and barrier can be for ATC. Barrier can be also something that supports the other actors, because we are all together. This is a web of influence there. It's aerodrome and flight operators and flight crew and ATC and aerodrome design and layout. So this is all together. We influence each other. And if you look at the flight crew barriers at the very top level, and we were using the safety functions map, SAF map methodology. On the top level, there are basically 5 functions. They are broken down to sub-functions and sub-functions. There are hundreds of those, but at the very top level, there are just 5 functions to manage the risk of runway collision. First is position awareness. 3 of these functions are to prevent runway incursion initiation. So know your position. The second is ATC clearance understanding and following. So know the ATC clearance, cross-check, write down, not to forget. But this is ATC clearance understanding. The third one is routing. So follow it with your route, taxi route planning, following. So these 3 functions, actually top functions, are to prevent initiation of runway incursion. But there are other 2 that help you to mitigate once it is initiated by yourself or someone else. And the first one, well, the last one is collision avoidance, to take action. But before that is traffic awareness. So to be aware of the other traffic when you need to do collision avoidance, or to be alert, maybe to initiate collision avoidance. And here, this one, traffic awareness, is key in this case. So the 111 is supporting traffic awareness. In case someone makes a mistake, maybe flight crew or someone else, and in case for these scenarios that we can capture that mistake through traffic awareness, that we can hear that there is a conflicting takeoff clearance, or that there is a landing clearance and then a clearance for a vehicle to enter the runway. So that's the shared situational awareness that can bring the traffic awareness. That's the 111. There are other ways. There are other ways the same function can be implemented, or there are complementary ways. So if you read GAPPRI, you will see that the way the recommendation is drafted there is asking for people to build a plan. So not to just to do it tomorrow, but to build a plan and to think about alternative ways to complement the same function, which is traffic awareness. Just there are examples in GAPPRI, but let me share with you two. One is coming from Prague Airport, where airport authority equipped all the vehicle drivers going on the runway with iPad, basically type of functionality where you have all the traffic on a moving map together with some alerts. Of course, you don't know the intentions of the traffic, but then it still gives you some traffic awareness, serves and complements the same purpose. Similarly, Lufthansa implemented it at the Frankfurt airport, very similar system, but for flight crew, based on ATC surveillance. They uplink it to the electronic flight bag, so it's a moving map again with traffic on it that can help flight crew to be aware of the traffic around. So you don't know again the intentions. You can grab it probably by applying this principle of 111. And the other thing we said is, like, if you cannot just do it tomorrow, because we recognize there are differences from location to location, from airport to airport, you can still do some things to enhance your protection in case in some incidents, some scenarios, you need to tap on the traffic awareness safety barrier. And then you can build a stepwise plan. And for example, you can consider what I just mentioned, or other measures like partial implementation of this sharing communication on one and the same frequency. So instead of teaching vehicle drivers to be fully proficient in English language, maybe some limited set of phraseologies would still be a step in the right direction. So next slide. And we provided an example in GAPPRI what that may be. We call it 4 for safety. These are 4 phraseologies: runway entering or crossing, operations on the runway, vacating runway, and hold short of the runway. So even that could be sufficient for helping with the shared traffic awareness when it is performed in English language and on the same frequency. But again, what is really important, and the approach taken by GAPPRI, is multiple layers of protection. And to keep in mind, when you do something, what is the actual purpose of it? And here the purpose can be achieved, or you can do things that can complement the same purpose. And the purpose is traffic awareness in case runway incursion is initiated. Thank you.
Okay, so next few slides going to look at a little bit some of the advanced technologies. And so this recommendation, ANSP 28, is one that hopefully most will recognize from previously. And it's looking at the H24-hour stop bars or other similar lighting systems. And specifically included this one because what we found when we were working through this recommendation and trying to take it from the European action plan to the global one was that in point C here, which is looking at the procedures for unserviceability of the stop bars, we found that when we were talking to different airports, different states, different regions, they had different procedures for when things were unserviceable. And in the old GAPPRI report, we'd laid out a specific set of suggested procedures to follow, but this was no longer really suitable for the GAPPRI report, and so those are no longer specifically mentioned, but they are provided as references for people to go and refer to. And then if we jump to the next slide, please. So one of the things we also found internally in CANSO was that one of the CANSO members has got two airports in two different countries, that with one of them with active stop while handling 24 hours, and then one of them without. And the one that has it has a runway incursion incident rate 0.7 per 100,000 movements, compared to the one that doesn't have it, which has 8 runway incursions per 100,000 movements. So you can really see there the benefit that applying some of these recommendations can have. Next slide, please. So touched on as well runway status lights. So we saw in the example earlier on how the runway status lights became active, but the pilots saw them but then didn't necessarily react to them. So just to provide a bit of initial background to what runway status lights are, so that they're meant to be an independent alerting system to pilots to warn them about the status of the runway. And so they're made normally up to 3 sets of different lights. There's runway entrance lights, takeoff hold lights, and then the runway intersection lights where you have crossing runways. But one of the things that the FAA has found is they're quite expensive to implement at different airports. There's quite a lot of infrastructure changes with installing the lights and setting up all the logic. And so what they've decided to do is then work forward with RIPSA, which is a reduced version that just uses the runway entrance lights. And hopefully that means that they'll be able to roll it out to more smaller airports, and therefore get greater benefit from the system. Next slide, please. So the GAPPRI report, it's quite big. It'll probably take you a number of nights if you're trying to use it for reading before bed. But what we're quite keen is also to touch on some of the other recommendations outside of ANSPs. And so we've just included a few here. There's lots of others. Highly recommend reading as much of it as possible. So the first two here are looking at recommendations within the aerodromes group. And so the first one is leading and lagging runway safety performance indicators. And it's key that ANSPs are involved in setting what these indicators are, so that both the aerodrome and the ANSP know what you're measuring and you're measuring the same thing. And then also for the driver training program requirements, ANSPs should be having an input here so that the training is consistent and everybody knows and expects. So the ATC know what the driver is going to do, and vice versa. The driver knows what ATC is going to say and talk to them about. The next two are with regulators. So the regulators have a recommendation about ensuring that the content of training materials across pilots, air traffic controls, and drivers is consistent. And then they're also in Regulator 4B looking at the effectiveness of temporary closures or repairs to runway and taxiways. And as we'll all know, as safety people, as soon as you change something, the risk increases. You saw it in the example earlier where pilots were expecting one thing, something changed, the risk increased, and that led towards the incursion. It's the same with temporary closures, taxiways change, people aren't quite used to the flows, and then things go wrong. The last one then is around the R&D. So the R&D organizations should be looking into researching visual aids on the airport surface regarding ATC clearances. And clearly ANSP should be involved in this. Next slide, please. So I'll hand over to Anthony now. He's going to go through how to support and implement the GAPPRI document.
Great, thank you very much, James. We can, then next one, please. Next slide, please. Yeah, so so that was a lot of background information. You're probably thinking now, well, that's all great, but how do I apply that for my organization? How do I turn it into some really practical, actionable items that can improve runway safety at the aerodromes that I operate at? And the answer is, of course, to start by performing a gap analysis of your procedures, systems, technology, infrastructure, etc., against the recommendations within GAPPRI. We're focusing this session on the ANSP recommendations within the GAPPRI report, but as James mentioned, that's only a small part of the picture. So the first step we're recommending is to engage with those other relevant stakeholders at the aerodromes that you operate at and within your other state organisations to encourage them to undertake this process as well and to do it as a collaborative effort. Each stakeholder can lead an individual gap analysis, obviously. However, there are recommendations assigned to particular parties that may benefit from input from other stakeholders as well. So the analyses, while focused on the individual stakeholder, are much better if not performed in isolation. Once each of those individual analyses are completed, or even while they're underway, actually, they then provide a great basis for that collaborative conversation, and local runway safety teams, if they're in place, and national runway safety teams as well, provide a really great forum to be able to have that collaborative discussion. Next slide, please. So in terms of completing that gap analysis against the ANSP recommendations, CANSO, in conjunction with IATA, have put together a simple gap analysis tool that you can download using that link on the screen. The tool's great for performing that sort of first pass gap analysis. It allows you to mark each recommendation as either implemented or not, and has some kind of tables and analysis tools in there and charts, etc., to help you provide a bit of a progress summary and see where you're at against implementing the full set of recommendations. And next slide, please. However, as we all know, the world is never quite as simple as just kind of yes implemented or no not implemented. So particularly in that ATM space, we know that we operate in many more shades of grey. So in terms of the analysis that we're commencing at Air Services, we're taking it a step further than that just simple yes/no gap analysis, and we've developed a set of responses based on both level of conformance with the recommendation and also status of any action underway or needing to be commenced in order to increase compliance with or conformance with the recommendation. So the first potential outcome of the gap analysis is that we already fully conform with a particular recommendation, so no further action is required apart from obviously the kind of ongoing monitoring and assurance. However, if we identify that we only partially conform with a particular recommendation, we then start to look at, okay, what's the status of, what's the applicability of the remaining parts of that recommendation to our operations, and we recognise that everyone's context and everyone's environment is unique. So making sure that in that kind of unique context for your operations, that the rest of the recommendation is applicable and is going to add value and reduce risk within that context. Then we look at, okay, if we agree that further action is required, then is that action already in progress, or does something need to be commenced in terms of some further action? And then the same for if we don't meet a recommendation at all, is further action warranted in our context and for our unique operations, and is it in progress or not? And next slide, please. So that's all in progress, as I said. This is just an illustrative output. It's not the final product as yet. But what it will hopefully give us is a bit of a heat map of where we want to prioritise our effort for the most benefit. Like everyone on the call, we have limited resources and limited time, so we want to make sure that we're prioritising action where it's going to give the most benefit from a risk perspective. And this tool will, or this gap analysis technique, will hopefully allow us to identify those reds and oranges in the gap analysis that are those situations where we don't already comply, potentially we don't even partially comply with some of the recommendations, and where action is maybe not already underway, if that's the case, to meet the full recommendation if it is identified as adding value, as I say, once you assess it against that context. So it'll enable us to really focus our effort on the priority areas based on that further action being required. And back to you, James, to look at the next steps.
you very much, Anthony. So yeah, we'll just move on to some of the next steps. So one of the things we want to do with this webinar is not just talk you through the document or anything, but also to give you some hands-on tools. And you saw that with the simple gap analysis shown previously. So one of the things that CANSO made quite a while ago now was the runway safety checklist. This was created to be a tool for ANSPs and airports to review their runway safety more holistically. So it's actually made up of more sections than just runway incursions. So it also covers excursions, unstable approaches, organizational aspects, and then also local runway safety teams. And the format of this tool is a set of questions that ideally you can take to forums such as your local runway safety team and work through them and discuss the questions and try and answer how they apply to your operation and to be sort of thought-provoking things. And so when GAPPRI was announced, one of the first things we did was actually go through this list of questions and think, okay, what aspects here should we be putting into GAPPRI? And then vice versa, now that GAPPRI has been released and published, we've gone back through our checklist to try and compare how can we improve it, what additions can we make, how can we refine the language. So on the right, you'll see the QR code, which will download a clean version of the checklist in a Word format. Next slide, please. This is just two screenshots just to show you how the formatting is. So on the left, you can see some of the questions around local runway safety teams, and on the right, some of the ones we've got on runway incursions. You'll see there prompts around things like how are capacity enhancing procedures at your aerodrome affecting potential hazards, and just to work through them. Next slide, please. As we said, we've conducted a gap analysis on the runway safety maturity checklist against GAPPRI, and so far we have found some things that are in GAPPRI that aren't in our checklist, so we need to add them. Some things that are in the checklist but didn't actually end up being part of GAPPRI. And then in the middle, there's a few things that are the same, they're in both. There's some that actually we need to improve our checklist and provide some more references to the GAPPRI material. And then also some of them, so 12 of the issues, we still need to refine some of the language so that we're consistent across both. You can also use the QR code on the bottom right of this to download this version, which has the GAPPRI comparison. And then the next step, we will be updating the runway safety maturity checklist and releasing it as a new version. Next slide. Over to John.
Thanks, James. So as mentioned, and as you can see throughout this call, one of the things that we've talked about is collaboration. I want to say thank you to IATA. We've worked closely with them, again, with the Flight Safety Foundation, everyone that's worked with the GAPPRI. They had developed an analysis as well, and a link to their annual safety report is there. You can see that with the QR code. They did something similar for the aircraft operators, where they looked at the GAPPRI to see how they could implement it the best from the aircraft operator's perspective and what those were. So again, a strong partnership throughout with CANSO, and I want to stress that. I cannot stress that enough. So you can go to the next slide. So again, the acknowledgements that I just mentioned here briefly, Flight Safety Foundation, Eurocontrol, IATA, CANSO, ACI. It's just been a group effort for everyone that's been on the call today. It is truly a global effort in what we're trying to do with the GAPPRI in order to actually implement the guidance and explanatory materials. And so I want to say thanks for everyone that has made it what it is today, because it's been truly, it's taken a village to get us where we're at. Next slide. So in closing today, we have provided an overview of the GAPPRI, reviewed an incident and given some examples, as well as provided some tools like the gap analysis tool, the runway safety maturity checklist to use at your ANSP. As Svetomir mentioned earlier, the recommendations are for people to build a plan and thinking about an alternative way to accomplish the same function. Examples of alternatives that have been done in Prague were given, as well as Lufthansa with the moving maps. So we've given some examples today. I want to commend all of those again that have worked on the GAPPRI, the panel members that are here with us today, for everyone that's taken time out of their day to join us. And last but not least, the CANSO events team, who this would not be possible without. So thanks to the CANSO events team for that. The GAPPRI is a very useful tool to help mitigate runway incursions. I want to echo what Anthony said, that the biggest thing that you can do is sit down and engage in conversations with all those users at your airport. You can use the GAPPRI itself or some of the checklists provided to help facilitate those conversations. So we'll open it up to questions. I want to say thanks again to everyone that's taken the time to call today. And if you have those questions, please go ahead and enter them into the chat and we'll go from there. So there was a question that are the links available to access the gap analysis tool and checklist. So this will be uploaded onto the CANSO website, and you will be able to get access if you did not get those tools, if you weren't able to get to them from this webinar, that this will be uploaded to the CANSO website in a PDF format that you'll be able to go back and get those. So thank you for that question. Are there any other questions? Are there any comments? Okay. I believe that is it. Don't see anything at the moment. So the question comes up, and I'll ask this to my panel. It says, I would like to ask, for those various recommendations, how would you disseminate them to the different relevant parties? So I believe, Svetomir, do you want to take that one? How to the best way to disseminate the recommendations?
Yes, I can take that. Yes, it's much like protection against accident. I wish that there is a one way that you do it. It's a magic wand, and and then it is achieved. But there is no one way. There is no one channel. Let me just highlight some. This plan, GAPPRI plan, is well under ICAO global runway safety activity. Has been developed under the partnership, ICAO Runway Safety Partnership, and supports the ICAO Global Runway Safety Action Plan and Global Aviation Safety Plan, with the lower level recommendations and, more importantly, with the best practices guidance material as well. So ICAO is one of the channels that we used and we will continue to use to promote GAPPRI. During the air navigation conference that has just passed a month and a half ago, a joint paper was presented by many organizations, including CANSO, IATA, Airport Council International, Flight Safety Foundation, IFATCA, IFALPA. So almost all important for the subject global organizations, together with the support of 3 states that helped us introduce the paper on the subject. That was Brazil, United Kingdom, and Singapore. A paper was approved, so ICAO, based on the recommendations, we continue to provide awareness on this available material. But what we are doing today is also part of dissemination, part of this work. So the global partners like CANSO, they are providing awareness to their members. IATA did that during their World Safety and Operations Conference that was last month as well. There was a dedicated panel where speakers, including speakers from Honeywell, from Delta Airlines, provided awareness and what they specifically do for implementing GAPPRI and their perspective. In Europe, EASA, that's multiple motivational factors, of course, but EASA launched an activity and Runway safety task force, and one of the tasks there of the task force is to look to GAPPRI to do a gap analysis and see what is for EASA there in Europe. And again, I can invite each and everyone that is here on this call to spread the word and engage with their partners and locally with the players to promote GAPPRI. It's not a plan that's devised to be one size fits all. It needs to be looked and actions to be selected, but help is available. I'm sure CANSO can help. If you want help from Flight Safety Foundation, don't hesitate to reach out. We can provide a help based on the information that we have been collecting over these 2 years now of work.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The only thing I might add,
Smetana,
John,
thank you for that one. Go ahead, Anthony.
Sorry, John. Yeah, the only thing I might add is, we've talked a lot about collaboration across various organisations that make up the ecosystem, but there's obviously a lot of internal stakeholders within an ANSP that need to be involved as well. So a good first step, I guess, is identifying those internal stakeholders that need to be involved in that gap analysis process and that ongoing conversation as well to enrich that from obviously your operations team, but through to your procedures teams and your safety management teams, AIS, etc. Making sure that everyone's perspective is involved to make sure you get the best outcome against the recommendations in terms of any action that you want to take.
No, completely agree. Completely agree. We had another question that came up for either Anthony or Svetomir. It says, from my knowledge, one factor that may contribute the runway incursions is false expectations. Do you want to share any ideas on how to identify and reduce those expectations?
Well, I can share something. We had a great discussion during the GAPPRI work, but that was in another group. That was aircraft operators group, where expectation bias has been identified often as one of the factors there that can contribute to certain scenarios of taxiing events. Like, I mean, look at what happened with the incidents that we started talking about, the JFK incident. Flight crew prepared for one runway that was changed after. So call it expectation bias or call it another type of human factors, tunnel vision or whatever. But flight crew, the captain continued taxiing to what was originally cleared. Although, I mean, they confirmed the clearance. So we had a discussion, it's an ongoing discussion that I think we involved some human performance experts into that, because there were some suggestions like remove any expectation, because like it's like with the safety events, if we remove the exposure event, like if there are no crossings of the runway, that there will not be a problem of runway crossings. So if there is a perimeter taxiway, there will not be problems with the runway crossings. But it's not the same here. It's not the same because expectation And this was reminded by the human performance, the very top level human performance experts that we involved in the discussion. Expectation is a very important function of how our brain works. This is part of the cognition, and it's very simplistic to just say remove the expectation and then we are not going to have expectation bias. There are other measures that needs to be introduced to trap when expectation can lead actually to the initiation of scenarios. And there is a lot of information about that in GAPPRI. There is a lot of information about memory aids, about cross checks, technology as well to support. So we cannot find a single cause probably, but we can introduce multiple lines of defenses that can be helpful in case expectation turns into an expectation bias and it actually goes into some sort of deviation from what was planned or cleared. I'm sorry not to give you a single silver bullet how to fight expectation bias. Well, maybe the single bullet is to be aware of your own expectations. That's the thing.
I think the human version 2 is the solution to expectation bias. We're just waiting for that one to come out.
So there was a question on there. Is there anything to do in the cockpit to improve more pilot situational awareness? And James, I'll throw that one to you. Is there anything that can be done in the cockpit to improve pilot situational awareness?
Yeah, I mean, so from a basic, if you start it from like a comms point of view, just like Sverre touched on it with the future plan of 111 of actually talking on one frequency so that everybody knows and is talking on the same point and has the full situational awareness of what's going on around the runway and the clearances that are being given. If you're then looking from a technology perspective, we've got the likes of moving maps in the cockpits, providing pilots with where they are on the airfield, where their routings are. And then there's also the big one, which would be effectively, as Sverre alluded to, TCAS on the ground. Got TCAS in the air, it can alert when there's potential conflicts between aircraft, but we haven't yet got it on the ground. And that is in development with the R&D and the aircraft manufacturers that will be able to use the surveillance data and provide alerts and resolutions to pilots to try to prevent the runway incursions.
Okay, thank you for that. For new airports, what process would you recommend? So I will throw that out to anyone that wants to answer. I know I have a thought about it, but I don't know. Does Anthony, do you have any thoughts? If there's a new airport that's out there, what process to recommend from the ANSP's perspective?
For the ANSP to follow to engage with the new airport, or for the new airport, I'm going to guess the answer's sort of the same, right? As I talked about it, it's about identify your gap, the scale of your gap against the recommendations, and make sure you engage with that new airport, or if you're at that new airport, make sure you engage with the ANSP and the regulator and your customers, your operators, so that it can be a really collaborative effort to make sure that everyone operating from that aerodrome is are all working towards reducing the risk as far as reasonably practicable.
Yeah, and setting up that runway safety, that annual runway safety meeting,
absolutely,
to discuss where those are. I mean, that's huge to be able to have that conversation, sit down with not just the airports, but with the operators, the regulators, the air traffic control, everybody that's there to sit down and just have a group discussion and a group think of where it is, and using some of those checklists are vital to help if you're not sure where to get started. So I would definitely say that.
Yeah,
I can
the question came up, is there a I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yes. There are a lot of guidance available, including from ACI, about safe design. If it's about the aerodrome itself, the layout, the signs and markings, Of course, there is ICAO Annex 14 that it's, of course, a paramount importance to be followed, but there are other things which are not necessarily regulatory compliance that can still be done, and ACI is a good source of information there. And what I would recommend is a joint, like you said, that the partners get together and perform a joint risk and resilience analysis. Each airport comes with certain idea of how more or less the configuration will look like. And this configuration will determine the traffic flows. Now, traffic flows, there will be an exposure for potential runway incursion scenarios. Not that they will happen, but if you land and then you cross an active runway, you know that's an exposure for potential incursion of an aircraft crossing after landing and taxiing in. And as I mentioned, what we see in incidents, that contributing factors there are quite often fatigue or low alertness. Let's say it's nothing to do very often with the workload situation. So if you just hammer it with measures for flight crew workload management, that's not going to help you in this scenario, that you need to do other things. So if you look in GAPPRI at the last part in the annexes there, we described this risk and resilience methodology. It is RIRA, a runway incursion risk and resilience methodology. Look what are the traffic patterns. Look to what scenarios they can lead. For each of them, identify high-level functional barriers, and they go to the shopping list and see what are the different ways to implement these barriers, and go for multiple layers of protection. But again, set a multidisciplinary team involving an SP, a drone operator, maybe local users at this airport, similar to the local runway safety team, and perform this dedicated analysis.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think that's a collective thought from everyone here. With I think that's very, very important. Next question, James. Is there a suggestion to use a multicolored light track on taxiways for every plane? So, do you happen to know anything on that? Have you heard that?
I don't think that's in there. I mean, the closest thing you'd get is probably the sort of follow the greens type systems, but I don't think that. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. There's a multicolor light tracking as a recommendation.
Yeah, standard lighting. Yeah, exactly.
So it's just worth mentioning, John, that I think they've now added in the 2 runway safety survey handouts into the GoToWebinar as a handout.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, absolutely. And those are in the webinar. They are under the handout section. If people want to download them, they could get access to them there. So thanks, James, for mentioning that. What is the role of the AIS department on the prevention of this kind of accident? I mean, I think that for me, it's to look at it and analyze, kind of from a more holistic perspective to see where it came from, to really kind of do an in-depth analysis as to what caused it, what were the factors that were there. And then I think that it's always, a lot of times with aviation, the prevention usually comes from the lessons learned from incidents that have happened in the past. And I think that a lot of times whenever you're looking at prevention, you're looking at things that may have happened. So it does tend to lead to a backwards looking thing that gets us looking forward in the future. So we see what incidents have happened in the past to help try to prevent them in the future. Does anybody else want to add to that? Mm-hmm.
Sorry, John. AIS, did you say AIS?
AIS, yeah.
Okay, yeah. We have some recommendations about AIS, yes, both for aerodrome operators and for NSPs. Yeah. And they are, I cannot quote them directly, but they can be checked. And it's more about information that the information provided to pilots, including NOTAMs, ATIS, and other technology that can be used, is accurate, procedures implemented for that. But I think more importantly, when there are temporary changes, is remember there were even accidents related to temporary changes, flight crew not being aware of the temporary changes, works in progress, and this can create an impact on flight crew navigation capability, flight crew position awareness, and awareness of closed runway, for example. So I think that's more the AAS. But again, check the plan. There will be something very specific, especially in the guidance and explanatory material. There will be something very specific about AAS.
Yeah, ANSP recommendation 17 is the reference there. Yeah, and as Svedmir said, there are others corresponding in terms of operators as well. So go and have a look at that one. As Svedmir said, talks about making sure that everyone's up to date in terms of the aeronautical information in relation to the maneuvering area.
Thanks, Anthony. Someone asked, can we have more details on the CANSO checklist comparison? James, do you want to touch on that one?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the simplest thing is we've now included it into the chat, so please go take a look at it. And especially it was just to try to get some sort of alignment between our checklist, which was developed quite a while ago, and make sure that we're aligned with the recommendations in GAPPRI. Yeah, I mean, hopefully we'll get that released hopefully soonish as a final clean version.
And that came out of the emerging risk subgroup from the CANSO Next Gen SMS Global work group. So there was some work that was done by someone, I believe at AeroTI, that did the in-depth analysis that works on that work group that really dug into it and was able, I mean, there was a lot more details that were provided. We actually had a slide, I know, that I think we ended up taking out of the presentation because it was so in depth. We just thought that it may be a little confusing. So it was definitely something that was analyzed really carefully whenever they were looking at that particular checklist. So thank you for that. Is it possible to apply AI for supporting the GAPPRI to prevent runway incursions? I
think for me, for this, like AI is always a tricky one, especially I think for aviation going forwards, because of we're quite a rule-based industry in the sense of we need to understand exactly why things are happening. And so when you start applying AI, which tends to act in a black box of the inputs go in and something gets spit out, when you don't actually understand the reason it's making its decision, or if it's suggesting that there could be an incursion or not an incursion, it makes it quite difficult in my opinion. So I think potentially it is there in the future, but I reckon a lot of work will have to take place before we see AI trying to be used for prevention of runway incursions.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, I think that it could be a potential tool to help later on, but I know that there's not something that is there today as far as that's concerned. Next thing, definitely convinced that situational awareness must be a key factor to improving safety. Bilingualism is deteriorating safety, especially in the runway's vicinity. But, you know, I think that goes back to what the 111 was Svedmir and mentioning, you know, one frequency, one runway, one language. So I think that definitely is important. I think that we are good. I just wanted to say thanks. I know that this has been a long time coming. I will say that with everyone that's put work into the GAPPRI. I think that you know, taking the time out to sit down to engage in those conversations is very, very important. I will pause there and see if there's anybody that's any of the panel members that have any closing thoughts on anything or want to leave with any closing thoughts. Anthony, I'll start with you. Do you have any closing thoughts?
No, just thank you to you, John, for facilitating today, and thank you, James, Vedimir, and for everyone who's participated as well.
Thank you. James, do you have any closing thoughts?
I suppose just say that if people want support and stuff, to obviously reach out to CANSO and things. And also, if you are a member of CANSO, please come and join the work groups and take part and join the initiatives and the future work that we'll be doing. We always need more volunteers. So.
Absolutely. Absolutely. This is a volunteer effort, so it's been huge. It's been a Herculean effort. And last but not least, Svetomir, do you have any closing thoughts for us?
I mean, to thank you, John, for the excellent work in organizing that. That was really a masterpiece in organization. James and Anthony for their participation as well. And to re-emphasize what James said, like if you need support or you need to discuss, join CANSO, reach out for support. Flight Safety Foundation also is always available to, that's our purpose, to provide awareness and support. And keep in mind that runway collision risk, because of its nature, is increasing linearly with the number of traffic. When the traffic doubles, the risk will more than double with everything else equal. And traffic is increasing a lot. All the forecasts are for doubling the traffic for the next 15 to 20 years. So we cannot just stay where we are. We have to introduce more protections if we want to keep our otherwise very good safety records that we have in aviation.
Thank you. Thank you, Svetomir. Nicely said. Thanks to all the panel members again, and again to the events team for making this happen, and for everyone that's taken the time to call in. Chimay, I'll turn it back over to you.